Many of us come to psychedelics looking for clarity, a way to make sense of the messiness of being human. But what happens when the path itself fractures beneath your feet? When the thing you built, the thing you believed in, collapses? Welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. This is your host, Paul Austin, and today I'm joined by someone who's lived through that kind of rupture and used it as the doorway back to deeper practice. I'm speaking with Martijn Schirp, who first came on the podcast years ago. Martijn is a former co-founder of Synthesis. Him and I started this in 2017 and then really built it together in 2018. And he is now founder of Buddhism, and he returned to the show to explore what it means to rebuild a life from the inside out. In our conversation, we talk through the rise and fall of Synthesis and the leadership lessons that Martijn gleaned from crisis and burnout. We explore how Buddhist teachings from skillful means to interdependence can reshape the psychedelic field, and why the popular idea of ego death may miss something essential about who we really are and what psychedelic work is all about. Martijn also shares how extended time in the Himalayas helped refine his view of awakening and how those insights have now crystallized into a path between worlds, his year-long contemplative training that weaves together Buddhist practice, ecological ethics, and contemporary contemplative science, with an optional psychedelic Dharma retreat track towards the end of the year. That program runs from January 8th through December 17th next year. And if this conversation may interest you and you want to find out more, you can follow the link in the episode description for more info or to apply. All right, before we get into it, here's a quick word from our sponsors. If you've been wanting to turn your passion for psychedelics into a meaningful and profitable practice, then check this out. Enrollment is now open for our microdosing practitioner certification program. And in just 18 weeks, you'll become a certified microdosing practitioner, mastering my signature San Pedro microdosing protocol for nervous system regulation while developing the somatic coaching and business skills to launch or expand your practice. This isn't just another theoretical course, it's hands-on, high-touch training that helps you integrate our microdosing protocol, refine your practitioner presence, and graduate ready to start enrolling clients right away. If you're ready to help others move from dysregulation to balance and build a thriving business doing work that matters, I'd love to see you in our next microdosing practitioner cohort. Just follow the link in the episode description or visit psychedeliccoaching.institute to learn more and apply. All right, that's it for now. Let's get into my conversation with Martijn Schirp. Hey, listeners. Welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. Today, I have Martijn Schirp. Martijn is a former co-founder and a business partner of mine many, many years ago. We started Synthesis, which we'll talk a little bit about. And if you're interested in the story of Synthesis, I would invite you to listen to the episode that we published with Miles Katz about a year and a half ago. We went into depth and detail. Today, we're really going to focus on what Martijn has as a new project, which I'm really fascinated by, that explores the overlap of traditional Buddhism and psychedelics. So Martijn, before we get into it, I just want to say hi and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be back. I think it's been 7 years since we last spoke on this podcast, so lots has happened, as you referred to. So thank you for having me back, and I'm very excited to talk to you today.
So let's start just by, I guess, addressing the elephant in the room, if you will. So Synthesis was a project that we, had initially kind of brought to the out into the world in 2017. Soon after that, we recruited Miles to come join our little duo, and in April 2018, we launched Synthesis. We wanted to go big with Synthesis, and yet at the same time, and I'll just be explicit about this, you and I have somewhat similar personalities, and there was a lot of tension or friction in that, right? And so at the end of 2018, we thought it would be in the best interest of everyone that I really step back and that you take the reins for Synthesis. And 2019, it really blew up, and going into 2020, it was still going strong, and then COVID hit. And that really put a wrench in your plans. So sort of bring us, especially as the CEO, Martijn, of Synthesis, COVID hits, it's March 2020, you have to cancel retreats. What's going on for you at that point in time? How do you recover from that and still raise another $10 million,
Right.
I believe, in a
Mhm.
Series A, and so let's start there with that particular
Yeah,
point.
diving in deeply immediately. That was a very difficult time, I think, for me and for the team and for everyone involved. Like nobody saw this coming, and the borders just closed, and overnight we lost our business model. We lost all our revenue, and we were like, as you know, retreats is not an easy business model, and it takes time to build all the aspects that really co-create this sacred container. And we finally got into good stride, and then suddenly we were growing, and suddenly we looked at, oh shit, we have 6 months of runway, and then we're dead in the water. And I can't reflect back and say, wow, I managed it very well. Like I got I was very overwhelmed by it, and how much hard we worked towards synthesis, and how much we believed in the vision, and how much we cared about the experience that people had. And then overnight, it felt like we were losing everything. And so we basically went back to the drawing board, and we knew we had a very talented team that were very dedicated to the psychedelic field. And we knew, like, retreats weren't necessarily the only aspect that had to be solved for people to get access to psychedelics. And one of them was, like, we were always looking for really good facilitators. And we knew that as hopefully Oregon would open up, in Colorado and other places, like we need trained people. And within training, there's this tension between, like, okay, it might take a decade to really build the competencies needed to really develop a quality experience, and to really guide people through some of the difficulties under these experiences. And at the same time, there's a really big need. Like, there's a really big interest, and right now there's a lot of access without training. And so we tried to find a balance. Like, can we develop a training that will take, a year and a half, 2 years, that will have in-person experience and hands-on experience as well, but maybe we can push that back towards, hopefully one day COVID will be managed or regulated in such a way that we can open up borders again. And so I stepped down as CEO. Like, it was seen that maybe in this time of transition, we need someone with more experience, maybe some more maturity. I think I was 29 or 30 at the time, and yeah, it was a difficult. Like, I was not at my best, and so I think that played into it as well. And we started pivoting. We started thinking, okay, how would the training like that look like? Like, what are the things that we could provide that maybe more academic institutions, for example, couldn't? And we developed an online conference that you kindly promoted, and we had like 600-700 people participate in that. And that was like the intent behind it. Was like, can we do like a retreat model in a conference? And that really resonated. And we had the faculty that we had in mind presenting about their core beliefs, like how to work with psychedelics, how to best understand them. And yeah, we were able, just before we ran out of money, to launch our training, maybe slightly rushed, but also, it was already in the making, so it wasn't completely new. And we had enough people participate that it showed, like, okay, instead of just being a failing retreat business, right now under COVID, we have a psychedelic skilled team that can solve problems in the psychedelic field. And that resonated. That resonated with the opening up of the psychedelic field in the US, and training is also slightly a more enticing business model for investors, and that allowed us to raise our bridge funding, and then our Series A into growing that training, and into planning to move into Oregon.
Right. And so that's where we'll pick up the story, right? So November 2020, this is the election that Joe Biden gets elected and Trump gets thrown out of power. And Oregon also legalizes psilocybin in this election. And so, strategically, I'm sure at Synthesis, you're thinking, oh, great. Oregon now has legal psilocybin, right? We had even talked about initially, how do we build a blueprint in a place like the Netherlands so it can be exported as architecture when states start to adopt it. Kind of bring us into then post raise, right? Like you've got that training, you've scaled that training. It was really known and well known as one of the most, if not the best, established sort of psychedelic practitioner training out there. Oregon is legalized. You're moving into that. At what point do you feel like, okay, we got the momentum and the traction that we need, and like we're good again? Did you ever get to that point, or did it always feel like things were always a little difficult and stressful and sort of challenging to navigate?
I think the latter. I think there were definitely moments of like growth and progress and learning that felt really good, even though those moments were short-lived. And as an entrepreneur, like it was like we felt the pressure, and it was like little celebrations, but a lot of hard work. And looking back, and hindsight is 2020, but I think there were always levels of like shaky ground. And I think the maybe some of the ethos by which we started, but definitely after COVID, there at least in me, and I think that was shared across the team. Like we have to work so hard to survive, and that survival like mentality. I don't think ever left us quite, and so I think at times we felt we had to make decisions fast, and that's kind of how we approached Oregon as well. We acquired a center like a year before it opened, and then there were we didn't anticipate a lot of things very well, and that became very, very costly, and that was like one of the factors of that was costly, but also the impact on the team. Like it was the pressure was very high, and there were really amazing people who struggle with burnout. That became a real thing. Like part of our culture that we kind of didn't know how to get out of again had elements of burnout and pressure, and I think one way to try and deal with that was to grow the team. Like, okay, like there's so much work to be done at this point, and this needs to be done very well. Our commitment is, I think our standards in too many domains were very high, and so that created pressure as well. And that together, created this mix that the best way to solve this problem is to find someone who's very talented and can take that on. But at the same time, that created this flywheel of, okay, now our burn rate increases too, so the pressure kind of moves somewhere else. Like now we need to grow faster, because otherwise we can't pay for this team. Therefore, we need more team to grow faster. And so it became this kind of fixation, I think, that it was hard to step out of that bubble. And I think that led to disagreements. And because of this, like we had the Dutch team that did the retreats, and then we had a more American team that did the training. And so we had two business models, two teams, two time zones, two investor bases. One got in because of the retreats, the other one got in because of the training. And to be a diplomatic force in the company became very, very time consuming in such a way that at one point the duct tape kind of wasn't able to keep things together anymore.
Well, and partly it was also, bad luck. I mean, we're reflecting on this 2.5 years after the fact, because a lot of the big challenge came to a head in March 2023, February 2023, March 2023, right around that time. But, you know, one of the core things was you had bought this beautiful retreat center thinking you could host and facilitate psilocybin experiences there. And the county that you were in Oregon made it illegal basically to facilitate psilocybin experiences outside of an urban environment, right? So there were a couple of things that were just bad luck.
So I've been dealing with the legal consequence of the bankruptcy for the last 2 years, and there's a whole process in the Netherlands you have to go through, and there's like an independent investigation, and we've been cleared, thank God, but it's been a very difficult, painful process, and I think I identified like 6 like those elements that we kind of mistimed a decision, and that in the end created like this double effect of one, it was costly in itself, but it also delayed the potential income of something that we had already invested in. And, you know, we could have handled like 2 or 3, but then with the stressors, with the disagreements within the team, and then this set of difficulties, we're just not able to manage to steer the ship in time.
After a decade of professional experience in the psychedelic space, I've learned that direct experience with these medicines is essential. And that's why our practitioner certification program includes something rare, a week-long immersive intensive at Brave Earth, a regenerative community and healing arts center in the lush jungles of Costa Rica. This is more than an online certification. It's a comprehensive learning journey that combines psilocybin experiences, daily yoga and meditation, a temescal ceremony, in-person coaching, and hands-on leadership development, all set against the backdrop of volcanic hot springs and cloud forests. The intensive is fully included in your tuition as part of our 6-month program that fuses cutting-edge psychedelic education with practical coaching skills. You'll learn directly from me, our world-class faculty, and other leaders who are shaping the future of psychedelic practice. Join a global community of coaches at the leading edge of this third wave of psychedelics and walk away with the confidence, clarity, and credibility to guide others safely and effectively. If you're ready to elevate your practice, learn more, and apply for our next cohort at psychedeliccoaching.institute. Again, that's psychedeliccoaching.institute, or check the link in the description. So, I do want to kind of move forward, though, because I want to talk about what you have coming up. So I know Martijn well enough to know that much earlier on in his career, he was a professional poker player, and you got, I think, 100th at the World Series of Poker. That was sort of if I'm not mistaken, right?
100, yeah, you remember it correctly. Like the World Series of Poker main event, I finished 100th.
We'll link to the full story if you want to get into deeper into Martijn's past. But after synthesis sort of happened, you went back to the Himalayas again, and we're creating a bridge now because I want to hear why the Himalayas. What is it that is so powerful about the Himalayas, and what is it that you deepened back into after all of the synthesis stuff? What is it that you deepened back into in the Himalayas that has helped you to bring forth this new initiative that we'll go into a little more detail about?
Yeah, so like towards the end of synthesis, at one point it became clear like there seems to be no clear way to get through this without the company having to go to bankruptcy. And that basically meant like, okay, I've worked the last 7 years on this project, and it will be basically gone. Like the only thing that will remain are the students and the team that will be left without a job and without training. And so it was a form of ontological shock for a while. Like really, I need to find a safe place, like my refuge, to digest this experience and to make sense of it and see how did I contribute in a way that wasn't very wise, and take ownership of that, and also go back to the drawing board. Like I was kind of a little bit getting sick of the psychedelic field, and I needed to take a break, and with the media coming out for like the narratives that were, in my view, kind of sensationalistically spun, like I didn't necessarily want to participate in that. And so my wife and I, we did volunteer work for 6 months in Portugal, and that was very sweet. There was also a non-dual spiritual center, and we had never been to the Himalayas before together. And I always wanted to show her, like, this is where my spiritual birth was, and this is where my teachers are from, and so I felt like a big insight, for me at least, is as psychedelics find their way into our culture, like there are many, many ways to make sense of them, to view them, to practice with them. But it became clear to me, like, I think the psychedelic field needs to learn from wisdom traditions. And, I'm holding the view that perhaps it might take multiple generations for us to really come up with our own kind of way that's not completely borrowed from other cultures. And it will probably have partly therapy, will partly contemplative practice, part science. But for me, it's always been part Buddhism. And so I wanted to, with that in mind, I wanted to go back and, recommit myself to the path. Not that I ever lost it, but during synthesis, that was not my priority. And now I suddenly didn't have any responsibilities anymore beyond the legal stuff and helping out a retreat guru who acquired the training. And so we spent quite some time in retreats and pilgrimage and finding a teacher as well that was modern enough and was open to psychedelics, because I still believe that they have a really important role to play.
Yeah, so just to sort of build off that thread, right? This overlap of psychedelics and Buddhism is an interesting one. Mike Crowley wrote this book, The Secret Drugs of Buddhism, which was all about how allegedly that the sort of ancient Buddhists, and what we find in some of these ancient texts, is these entheogenic plant medicines. And we won't get into the debate about whether that's true or not in this conversation, but that's been sort of one thread. Another thread that's been opened up is with Rick Strassman, who we've had on the podcast before, where Rick was more or less excommunicated from his Buddhist community as a result of openly doing research on an NDMT in the 1990s. And then you have other folks like Jack Kornfield and Bob Thurman, who have been very open about the fact that they started on this path because of psychedelics and then deepened into their lineage and practice and understanding of Buddhism as sort of a way to integrate or settle into a true contemplative path that wasn't necessarily dependent on psychedelics. So I'd love to open that can of worms for you. First of all, with some of the precepts around Buddhism, one of them is to not, intoxicate ourselves.
Right.
And so I'm curious, as a first starting point, kind of how do you look at or approach this overlap of psychedelics and Buddhism? And obviously you fall on the side of the integration of the two, but what sort of process have you gone through as you've really dove into that lens and that context as it relates to this religion?
Yeah. So for me, from the very beginning of working with psychedelics, they've always been synergistic on the path. Like, I've had tremendously beautiful, touching, truly significant experiences under psychedelics of what can only be termed as Buddhist visions. And, I never fell into the camp like, well, that's not real because it was, induced by a psychedelic. And so, it became very, I think, culturally appropriate to say, well, psychedelics got me on the path, but at the moment I'm on the path, it doesn't have any value anymore. And I don't think that can necessarily be true, because if you look at other wisdom traditions that continually engage with psychedelics, like, it doesn't diminish wisdom or doesn't diminish insight. On the contrary. So to me, psychedelics can be a skillful means, if used skillfully, that lead to valid visionary experiences. And so the fifth precept that you just referred to is the precept against fermented drinks that cause heedlessness, and it probably refers to alcohol. It's quite well established that cannabis was known as well during the time, and there was no clear precept against that. But that aside, I think the more technical answer to this is a psychedelic is very much dependent on how you view it, how you use it, what's the context, what's your practice, what's your intention, and that what's the outcome. That determines whether it's skillful or not. And so you can have. So skillful, like the psychedelic is not inherently one thing. It depends on all of its relationships that co-arise to make it a psychedelic experience. Is it this container or is it that container? Is it this intent or is it that intent? Is it this skillfulness or that? And so I think the more nuanced answer is, or the invitation is, what could we do and how can we hold psychedelics in such a way that it's more skillful versus less skillful? Can that be made? Can we see evidence of that? And can we see that in practitioners? Can we see that in teachers? Can we see that in the maybe the observations in research? And I think we can. I think we can see that psychedelics lead to valid insight and valid transformations that are congruent with the Buddhist path, which I think, if you simply define, would be reducing suffering, reducing things that cause us pain, and things that help us realize, quote unquote, our awakened nature, the capacity that we are, participatory in the universe. We are incredibly interdependent. The world is maybe cannot be fully reduced to matter, but has this mysterious dimension to it that you can open up to. And can psychedelics do that? And I think, at least in my experience, that's been unevocably yes. And I think more and more teachers are also coming out these days, saying like, "Hey, I'm practicing with psychedelics, and they help me." Commit even deeper to the bodhisattva ideal, for example. They help me understand even better what the four immeasurable virtues of the heart are. And that's been true for me, and I think we see that in the research, and I think we can see that anecdotally as well. But it depends on all of these conditions that we need to get right. And so that's kind of what I've been interested in. Like, what are the trainings? What are the views? What are the practices? What are the rituals that together make it such that it is skillful versus something that is not?
All right. I like this thread. So I want to deepen into this thread a little bit, because thinking of psychedelics as a skill is something that I have been talking about in the podcast for probably 4 years now or so. It was first brought to my awareness through Jim Fadiman, who talked to a friend of mine who then I spoke to. He thought, we should really think of efficacy that comes from microdosing in particular was the initial context as something that is more skillful, because a lot of folks don't have a lot of impact or benefit from microdosing, and it's largely because they're not doing it in a skillful way. Their dose is too high or too low. They're not doing it often enough, or they're doing it too much. There's not a capacity to really attune to the medicine in a way that has a net benefit, right? It might enhance anxiety, or it might really do nothing at all, in which case someone gets sort of like, oh, this isn't working, I'm just going to give up on it. They sort of quit on it too soon. But then it's expanded, in my understanding of it, not only to look at it from a microdosing lens, but also to look at it from the fact that, ayahuasca is a very different entheogen than iboga, which is a very different entheogen than MDMA, which is a very different entheogen when compared to something like LSD. So there's also distinction and nuance in the different psychedelics that we're choosing to work with, and maybe the ideal context or the ideal intention or the ideal outcome. So one of the things I've chewed on is sort of what are the first principles of skillful psychedelic use. So that's going to be my question for you, Martijn, because I'm just genuinely curious what you would have to say.
Yeah.
What do you think then are the sort of first principles of skillful psychedelic use, specifically in a modern context, in 2025?
Yeah, I think that's actually really important point you point out, to like the modern context. And we as moderns have, I think, certain blind spots that allow us to not clearly think and see the value of psychedelics. And one of them is, we see ourselves as a separate self. Like the mind is completely internal, the reality is completely passive and external and objective. So there's this duality. And the problem with that, it kind of assumes, and that happens a lot in the psychedelic field, is you take a psychedelic and then you kind of passively undergo this experience. And from a Buddhist view, that's not correct. From a Buddhist view, is you actively participate, and your participation depends on the contemplative skills you've developed. And so that depends on things like, for example, when anxiety arises, does that co-arise with a form of reification? Do you believe automatically that is real? And does that co-fabricate a reality that then feels very real? Or can you take full ownership of that, of the projection part of that experience, and say, wait a minute, the way I'm holding this experience gives rise to my anxiety. And do I then have the cognitive freedom to change how I'm holding it? Do I have that skillfulness? And that, that goes into things like reification, that goes into, can you make things phenomenologically opaque? Because a lot of things are transparent. We don't necessarily see the models through which we kind of perceive reality. But through meditation, for example, and through, you have different types of meditation. But through meditation, you can learn how to make those models opaque. They become visible. And then you can actually choose to, wait a minute, I don't have to hold it this way. And that, I think, is a real skillfulness that, especially with psychedelics, you can see the tremendous power of that. But it's still a skill that it's not easily trained under the conditions of psychedelics. Like you want to train it on simpler conditions. Like classically, you train it on your meditation pillow first, and you train yourself for like 50 to 100 hours on something specific skill. And then you train it off the cushion in relationship or in difficult emotions. And then, then you can take a microdose or a high dose, and then you can play with that. And I think that insight that we are not necessarily, like the world is not pre-given. It's not objectively there waiting for us to reveal itself, but actually the way we question it, the way we relate to it, opens up different ontological words. And so your commitment to what exists and what cannot exist kind of predetermines how your psychedelic experience is fabricated or is co-arises through the way you're holding it, through your views and beliefs, etc. And what I think Buddhism uniquely can do is provide us with the contemplative skills to play with that and to realize the profundity of that. And I think like psychedelics can then help us understand the kind of one of the fundamental ideas within Buddhism, which is interdependence or emptiness. And emptiness is not a nothingness, but emptiness is basically you cannot find an absolute substance in anything. And that paradoxically, often against people's instinct when they first hear this, it actually leads to a lot of freedom and a lot of openness and a lot of tenderness of the heart. But that is something that is quite skilled and advanced, and that takes time. And if you realize that on the psychedelics without kind of the way to digest those experiences, that can lead to a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear, because suddenly you dissolve and you dissolve maybe into this different reality, and that's terrifying. But if you've done that many times, if you can pretty reliably dissolve the self and enter for example, the yanas, which are they're kind of like mini psychedelic experiences with very stable taste, just pleasure or just evenness or just happiness, and you're completely absorbed in that. It's very much a psychedelic experience, and it happens on the psychedelic experiences, right? Some people have those experiences at one part of their journey, but if you've done that like 100 times, it's not scary anymore. If you infuse your whole experience in your body with compassion, for example, and from there you have memories of people harmed you, or memories of you harming others, and those are difficult to digest. But if you have the basis of compassion and understanding, then that experience co-arises with a way that you can digest them, as opposed to kind of reaffirming, let's say, like a narrative around victimhood or perpetratorhood. And so there are these contemplative ways that I think can prime you, and you can co-create your experience, that I think build this contemplative flexibility that I don't think is necessarily part of the psychedelic conversation as much as it is in Buddhism, because in Buddhism that is a really big part of the path. And I think combining those that's extremely potent if you kind of know what you're doing.
Yeah, so I'll provide a couple reflections here. I've had Eric Kaufman on the show a couple times. Eric has been a Zen practitioner for 40 years, and he also does a lot of leadership work with a lot of Fortune 100 companies, but also Dr. Bronner, some really kind of futuristic thinking. What Eric has always talked about is this notion of ego porousness, right? In the psychedelic space, we get so fixated on ego dissolution or killing the ego or transcending the ego. But then, we come out of these quote unquote enlightened states and we have to put our shoes back on. And so how do we put our shoes back on, but with a little more presence, a little more compassion, a little bit more heart, right? And so I do like this notion of, it's not necessarily about killing the ego, but it really is having a more porous ego, or a more porous sense of self, where we can be a little bit more flexible with our the way we may approach the world, and so that's sort of where I'd love to deepen a little bit more into this conversation, because even as I'm reading through Upayosis, so Upayosis is Martijn's new program. It's a 12-month psychedelic Dharma journey of awakening and planetary service that's creating bridges between traditional Buddhist wisdom and contemporary psychedelic practice. One of the clear lenses here, and probably the main lens, and this is what we shared a lot in common through synthesis, and what I think you're deepening into now, is this notion of we're living in this sort of meta crisis, or in particular, we're living through this ecological crisis, if you will, where I think it was Zach Bush. I just saw a reel from him on Instagram where Zach was talking about how we might have 80 years left as a species because we have poisoned the earth so much. And so now cancer rates are going up and autism rates are going up, and all of these other sort of issues are starting to come to a head because the ecosystem that we exist within is poisoned, and we are dependent. We are interdependent on that ecosystem. So I'm curious, what's your sort of greater hope in terms of restoring a level of harmony with the ecological context that we exist within, that you believe Buddhist wisdom as sort of an ancient technology or religion or practice? Why do you find that to be such an important, essential element of the awakening process in terms of being in service to the planet itself? And how might psychedelics help with that sort of overall process, if you will?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Paul. That's probably the thing that I care most about. The porous self, I think, is a much more accurate reflection of what we've always been. And currently we are very porous with technologies of extraction. And we basically have gotten quite blind, or most of us are quite blind, to the unintended consequences. And You can look at the coral reefs that are dying out. You can see the significant diminishing of species and pollinators. You can, and it's like we poison the world because on some level we believe that's not us. Like we wouldn't put our child in front of a car exhaust, but it's like that's a horrible image. But at the same time, we have no qualms in basically burning all the hydrocarbons and changing the atmosphere in such a degree that the collapse is more and more likely by every passing day. And so one of the things that I think Buddhist wisdom can help, hopefully there are many ways that can help us make this transition, but it's basically this whole constellation of human exceptionalism or like basically anthropomorphic framing that we almost perceive everything. And according to Buddhism, that's, if you look closely at your experience, it's like it's not true. Like your subjectivity is constituted by only things that are actually you cannot claim are you. Like this conversation, for example, you are my experience and you co-construct me in this moment. And so a much more accurate way of perceiving realities, instead of this subject-object divide, it's this many beings that co-create a network. And that, for example, a river is not just water molecules flowing from one end to another end. A river is children playing in it. It's the pollution in it. It's the treaties that hold it together. It's the plants that with their root systems provide protection against erosion. And realizing that, then we begin to understand that we are actually poisoning our lungs. Like the skin of the earth is our skin. And we see that now because the forever chemicals are piling up and creating tons of illnesses. And so one end is to understand that cognitively. I think through psychedelic practice, sometimes they're called ecodelics. It's this insight that we are a membrane and somewhat closed off, but not completely. And we are part of these larger membranes. And so one aspect is understanding this. The other aspect is feeling this and being this. And then another aspect is actually acting on it. And I think that's where the critical distinction is, because I think we all know about the climate crisis and the emergency we're in, yet we are incredibly attached and dependent on all these institutions that are direct, they have direct dependencies on hydrocarbons, and they're running out. And so what is that transition going to look like? And that transition needs, I think, to look like as a way that we need to be, one way that I really appreciate is to become the diplomats of Gaia. Like we need to make diplomatic agreements and treaties with other beings on which we depend. And so we need to start thinking about how can we rewild our farms? How can we make sure our practices of meaning include beings that we normally maybe don't even attribute sentience to, but are clearly part of this co-creation of the healthy membrane of the earth. And if we don't make that transition, then we will go down with the ship, because clearly the way we live right now is not sustainable. So it's impermanent, like all things are. But at the same time, new models and new ways of co-living haven't been made. And so what I think psychedelics and the Buddhist path can do is basically decondition us from these habituations and from these kind of very compelling and tempting ways of viewing that are clearly actually making us sick and are not, not helping us. And things like consumerism, extractivism, like non-cooperative models, there, I can go on these things, but like according to some commentaries, the problem we live in is deeply religious. Like the assumptions that we make about the world, like what beings can exist, what beings have a voice, needs to be met with another religious answer, and it needs to be post-Darwinian, it needs to be rational, it needs to include science, but it cannot put science as the arbiter of everything, and it needs to be slightly political, and it needs to have practice, and it needs to be and so it needs to have all these elements to be a good fit. And I think psychedelic Buddhism can be one of the ways to transition. I hope that's the intent.
So Upayosis is it's a 12-month program, right? You're doing this program for the very first time. It's coming up. It's starting in January 2026, going through the end of the year. The intention is to also have a retreat experience as part of that. And so I'm just curious, like, if you were to put it succinctly, in 2 minutes or less, for someone who might be considering the program or may want to join you as part of this, like, what's the transformation that you hope that they will go through? What sort of, who will they be by the end of a program like this? Not making any promises necessarily, but what is it that you really would love? What's the heart of what you'd love to explore and transform as part of this offering, overlapping psychedelics and Buddhist practice?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's very much in line with the classical Buddhist aspect of hopefully you will know your mind a lot better and participate a lot less in ways that actually make you suffer. So hopefully a lot less friction within yourself and a lot less friction with you and other people. So that's one aspect. Another aspect, I think, is a sense of purpose. Like, I think crisis, if you are resourced, can be a tremendous catalyst of change. And what we see right now, we need massive change. And we need ways to be kind of less individualistic and less a sense of separation. And I think through these practices, by developing a qualitative, informed meditative practice that is then enhanced with psychedelics, I think the framing or the models or the beliefs that structure our reality can be updated in a much more ethical, pro-social manner. And it's not for everyone, but I think if I can extrapolate from my own personal experience and if I can trust my teacher's experience, then that transmission from teacher to teacher, it works. And it creates a much spacious, mysterious, and at the same time grounded sense of self that is not necessarily separate, but understanding the whole collective a person is part of. And I think for me it's been incredibly beautiful. Like, I was able to digest the loss of synthesis in such a way that I think I've used it to not used it, but digested it and alchemized it in a way that has really deepened my purpose and my commitment. And I think we're being asked to do that on a planetary scale. Like, Gaia, the Earth, will become more and more powerful as opposed to humans in control. And we have to reckon with that. And so I think there's an ecological pressure that's kind of forcing us to see things more this way. And as you know, like, I like to be ahead of the curve with that.
Beautiful. Upayosis, that's UPAYOSIS.com. Upayosis. Say it for me, Martijn.
I should have picked a better name.
Upayosis.com. We'll also provide a link in this podcast. Martijn has always been a pioneer. It really was an honor to be able to help birth synthesis with him so many years ago. And so I'm sure this cohort, this training, if it is of interest to you, if you really are interested in walking this path and deepening in this path, I'm sure it will be absolutely wonderful. So Martijn, I appreciate you joining us today. Any sort of final thoughts or comments you'd like to share before we close?
No, thank you, Paul. I appreciate the time that I could share with something that's really dear to my heart and the gift that the Dharma and psychedelics have given me. And I think take psychedelic practice seriously, like build those contemplative skills, and beyond amazing experience that people can have, aim for a purpose, aim for something like liberation or awakening or planetary service. I think that is a possibility of working with psychedelics, and I think it's really beautiful, very meaningful, and also very much needed. So if this resonates, click on the link, and happy to jump on a call with anyone who feels the same way, and we'll have a tremendous year together.
Beautiful. Thank you again, Martijn.
Thank you so much.